Hey there guys, how's it going? Welcome back to my fantasy fight series. So today I'm going to be talking about a fantasy fight between two unified cruiserweight champions. Now Usyk was of course, as recently as about a year and a bit ago, he was the undisputed cruiserweight champion, and of course to this day is still undefeated. He's now at heavyweight. David Haye himself was a unified cruiserweight champion. He was never officially undisputed, however, he was called undisputed for several years. I remember back in the day, pretty much all the boxing media outlets in the UK called David Haye the undisputed cruiserweight champion, despite the fact he only had three of the belts. But I mean, that's just trivial. Who cares? He was a top level cruiserweight champion. So this is a battle between two top level cruiserweight champions, and the way I'm going to break this fight down is I'm going to be comparing these guys from back at their cruiserweight days. So Usyk from when he became undisputed champion, and of course David Haye from when he became champion. Who would win, and how do I think that fight would go? So this is a really interesting one. I would have loved to have seen this fight. I think it would have been a fascinating fight to watch. But I have a pretty clear idea of who I think would have won. This isn't going to be a particularly long video. Right off the bat, who do I think would have won this fight? Who do I think would have won? I definitely would have picked Oleksandr Usyk, and I definitely would have picked him to win. However, I wouldn't exactly call the fight a mismatch, and the reason why is because there's that old cliche in boxing, isn't there, of a puncher's chance. And David Haye, without a shadow of a doubt, had a puncher's chance. Now, David Haye as a heavyweight was a really big puncher. I mean, but as a cruiserweight, he was a monstrous puncher, and it was insane. Like, going back and look at some of David Haye's cruiserweight highlights, and just look at the raw punching power that he had with both hands. He had a tremendous overhand right. He had a pretty underrated left hook and a right uppercut that was one of the hardest right uppercuts in the cruiserweight division. David Haye was a monstrous puncher. Okay, and he had a lot of hand speed to go along with it, so he was very explosive and very effective. So in this fight, however this fight is going, well, let's say if Oleksandr Usyk is schooling David Haye, it would only take one punch. Let's say in the first 4 or 5 rounds of the fight, it would only take one punch from David Haye to turn the fight round and score a knockout. So I would definitely give David Haye a huge puncher's chance. Now, the reason I would pick Oleksandr Usyk, however, is for several reasons. There are several glaring advantages that Usyk has over David Haye. One advantage that he has is the advantage of stamina. David Haye never had great stamina, either as a heavyweight or as a cruiserweight. In fact, later on in David Haye's career, when he was fighting at heavyweight, he really had to be conservative of his energy. He really had to pick his shots and pot shot here and there, because he understood that he didn't have great stamina, and that his gas tank wasn't that great for a world level fighter. In fact, if you guys want to know how suspect his stamina was, check out his early fight against Carl Thompson. Carl Thompson was a veteran. He was the IBO champion. I believe he was like 39-40. And David Haye in that fight beat the crap out of Carl Thompson for a few rounds. But Carl Thompson wasn't going anywhere because he was just incredibly tough and had great powers of recovery. Had a good chin, had good durability, a lot of heart, decent stamina. And David Haye completely ran out of gas. And Carl Thompson just broke him down, dropped him, and ultimately Adam Booth ended up throwing in the towel. And yeah, he ended up stopping him. So David Haye in that fight showed that when he overexerts himself, he would run out of gas. And he's never really shown great stamina since. Okay, David Haye's always been a guy who relies on his one punch power and stays on the outside, doesn't really use up much energy, keeps his hands down, and, keeps himself conservative, keeps himself under control, doesn't really let his emotions overraw him, doesn't really get excited in the ring, because he learned from that Carl Thompson fight that he had to be that way. But as a result of that, David Haye's very, very unlikely to outbox a guy like Usyk. And the reason I say that is because Usyk has tremendous stamina. and Usyk has a great volume of punches. That's the thing. If you look at Usyk's career, any of his cruiserweight fights, he throws a lot of punches. You know, he's a guy who's constantly feinting, constantly sticking that jab out, constantly sticking it in your face, sticking it in your chest. Whipping the left hand, the left hook round the guard, constantly throwing combinations, constantly doing something, constantly on the balls of his feet, constantly feinting, constantly jabbing, moving, throwing combinations. Like Usyk's constantly throwing punches, and as a result of that, it would have been so difficult for a low volume fighter like David Haye to be able to throw and land enough punches to outbox Usyk and win on points. So David Haye, no way could he win on points. No way could he win on points whatsoever. He would have to land a lucky punch, and he would have to win by knockout, and that's why I give him a puncher's chance, because it's possible. Because Usyk gets hit. That's the thing about Usyk, is Usyk will let you get a shot in here and there, and he'll let you land a punch, kind of like the way that Triple G used to do. He's got that macho streak. He'll let you land a punch, and he'll nod and say good shot, and then he'll go to war with you. But if he did that against David Haye, if he let David Haye land a punch like that, big mistake. He could end up getting knocked out, because David Haye's a considerably bigger puncher than anybody Usyk's fought. But David Haye, like I said, his stamina issues would have been a problem, and that would have negated him from being able to win rounds. He wouldn't have been able to win rounds against Usyk. And if Usyk were to get David Haye to the body, and we know that Usyk's a very slick body puncher when he wants to be. When you look at when he fought Tony Bellew, he started working the body back around about the third and fourth round and completely slowed him down and took away his stamina. And I think that would have worked against David Haye, because David Haye's never had great stamina, and David Haye's never had a huge amount of volume. So Usyk would have had opportunities to really work and to bank the rounds. And of course, if he's winning the rounds, and if David Haye's slowly running out of gas, and if he can't land one of his famous haymakers, Usyk would of course start to pick up the pace and would start to land body shots. Would start to whip in that left hook round the side. Like he did to Tony Bellew. He started the fight throwing straight punches, but then once he got Tony Bellew stationary, once he'd figured Tony Bellew out and got his timing and got his accuracy in place, he started to throw left hooks and right hooks, and started to break him down and got the knockout. And David Haye, believe it or not, never had a great chin. All right, he was down on several occasions as a cruiserweight. In fact, if you guys want to see some of David Haye's cruiserweight fights, go and check out. I already mentioned the Carl Thompson fight where he was knocked down and stopped. Check out the Lalenga Mock fight. Lalenga Mock is was a super middleweight, who'd moved up to cruiserweight and actually dropped David Haye quite heavily. David Haye, of course, got up and knocked him out. But go and watch that. He absolutely almost flattened David Haye with a right hand. And David Haye was also knocked down by Jean-Marc Mormec. A lot of people forget about that. And it's interesting to me, like Jean-Marc Mormec was that was the guy that David Haye beat for the WBA and WBC titles. And then his very next fight, he fought Macronelli for a unification. That was for the WBO title. So David Haye only actually had 2 world title fights at cruiserweight. Only 2 world title fights. Then he moved up to heavyweight. So, if you're looking at resume, David Haye's cruiserweight resume is really only 2 fights. That's pretty much it. And still, he ended up getting dropped a bunch of times. I mean, like I said, Mormec dropped him before David Haye got up and knocked him out in the 7th. And that fight was actually a really hard fight for Haye. He was actually losing that fight. It was an extremely tough fight. He was getting outworked, he was getting outboxed, he was getting pushed back, he got dropped, and he was having all sorts of problems. And he managed to summon up the energy to come back and win the fight by knockout once Mormec, who was a bit slow and sluggish, started to slow down. And then when he fought Macronelli, I've seen that fight a ton of times. That was a impressive knockout. David Haye was, he was nip and tuck in the first round. Nothing really happened. But then in the second round, David Haye got cut above his eye, and then he was like, "Oh shit, I better end this." And he just went in there and just banged Macronelli out, and that was quite impressive. But Enzo Macronelli, the thing is, Enzo Macronelli had a glass chin. He was a good fighter, but had no chin. And, so being able to knock out guys like Mormec, who's quite easy to hit and quite stationary, and then a guy like Macronelli, who's chinny and doesn't have great chin, doesn't have great defense, you can't really look at those fights and say he would definitely do that to Usyk. So Usyk has shown, a great chin. So I don't think that David Haye would be able to be as lucky against Usyk as he was against those guys. I think that it would take one real solid, well-placed, lucky punch for him to knock out Usyk. and I just don't think I don't see it happening. I don't think it would. I think that it's possible, but I don't think it's that possible. I don't think it's that likely. So I think that Usyk would outbox David Haye, and I could see him winning a wide unanimous decision, or maybe a stoppage, because David Haye might get desperate in the later rounds. And I think if David Haye wanted to go the distance, David Haye could go the distance, because like what happened to him against Klitschko, for example, where he was getting schooled and dominated, but he decided to go into survival mode, and he made the conscious decision that he was going to go the distance. Against Usyk, that's possible too. Usyk isn't as big a puncher or as dangerous a fighter as Vladimir Klitschko, so obviously, if David Haye wanted to go the distance against Usyk, he could. But I think that if David Haye was so determined to win, if David Haye was going to risk it all to try and win the fight, Usyk could stop him, because he would catch him with that big, sweeping left hook and that right hook, and David Haye would just walk onto some shots, and Usyk could. I think Usyk would be fresher in the later rounds, and Usyk would be landing the harder, more accurate, quicker shots with combinations too. He would be landing combinations, so I think that Usyk would set David Haye up with the feints, and while David Haye's trying to claw back and find a way back into the fight while he's way behind, he would get desperate, he would miss, and Usyk would stop him. So I think that the outcome of the fight would depend on whether or not David Haye was going to risk it all to try and win. If David Haye was going to try and rally late in the fight, because if he did, he would get stopped. But if he didn't, I think Usyk would win by decision. So I think the most likely outcome would be Usyk by a wide decision, potentially a late stoppage. So that's how I see this fight. Usyk either by wide decision or late stoppage. This is just a pretty quick one. I think this one's pretty straightforward. Let me know what you guys think anyway. Thanks for watching, and God bless. And let me know what you guys would have thought about this fight. Who would you pick to win? So yeah, thanks for watching. God bless.